Shalom. Welcome to the Shepherd's Light Online Church. Before the service starts, we wanted to invite you to join our chat. The chat is where you can ask questions, share verses, and connect with other viewers from around the world. Just write your first comment and choose a nickname to join. If you need prayer, click the live prayer icon and you'll be taken to a private chat where one of our team members will pray with you. The service is about to start. Don't forget to sign up so you can keep your username and profile. God bless you and enjoy the message.
He became sin who knew no sin, that we might become his righteousness. He humbled himself and carried the cross. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, name above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, rescue for sinners, the ransom from heaven. Jesus Messiah, you're the Lord of all. His body the bread, his blood the wine, broken and poured out all for love. The whole earth trembled and the veil was torn. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, name above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel. He's the rescue for sinners, the ransom from heaven. Jesus Messiah, you're the Lord of all. All our hope is in you. All our hope is in you. All the glory to you, God, the light of the world. Jesus Messiah, name above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, rescue for sinners, the ransom from heaven. And Jesus Messiah, you're the Lord of all. And Jesus Messiah, you're the Lord of all.
Shalom, Nashimi Dakot. Hello, sweet women. I pray that you're doing so great and, that you had just an amazing Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year. Can you believe it was just all together this year? It only happens, I think it was 4 times in over 100 years that Hanukkah and Christmas were on the same day. And I like that. That's, I think that's really cool. And I'm having a hard time believing it's already 2025. Didn't last year just fly by? My grandmother used to say that the older she got, the faster the years would go. And so that shows how old I am, because last year flew by. But at the same time, I keep hearing younger people say that it just went so fast. But I think it's because we're all so busy, maybe. But I'm praying that 2025 is a year that we all grow closer to the Lord. And wouldn't it be great if he decided to come back this year? I think that would be awesome. So I've been praying about what book we should do next. And as you can see, since it's a new book, we have a new coffee shop. And I like this one. It's in the heart of Tel Aviv. And when I'm not there, it's a picture of it. And so I like this coffee shop. But anyway, the Lord kept laying on my heart to do the book of Luke. And I thought that's perfect because it's the season of the birth of Yeshua, Jesus. And we just celebrated his birthday, right? So grab something to drink and let's see what the Lord has for us. And before we begin, there's several interesting facts that I've learned about Luke. And so I thought we should talk about it. First, he was a Gentile. And he's the only Gentile that God had write anything in the New Testament, the Habrit Hadashah. And he wrote both the book of Luke and the book of Acts. And you probably already know he was a doctor. And Paul frequently talked about him. And so he was most likely Paul's doctor because he definitely went around with Paul a lot. And for example, in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, Paul wrote, Luke, the beloved doctor, sends his greetings, and so does Demas. And that was when Paul was writing to the Colossians, and he wanted them to know, hey, Luke's with me, he said hi, and so does Demas. So, reading and studying the book of Luke, I started thinking how doctors are usually very methodical, right? Methodical, shatati. And Luke definitely is. And I was looking at it. The definition is doing things in a careful, thorough, and orderly way. Methodical. And so you can see this in Luke's writing. Turn to Luke. Let's everybody get their Bible. Turn to Luke and let's read the first 3 verses. It says, many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. And remember, it's Luke talking. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most humble Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. So, first of all, most scholars say that Matthew and then Mark were the first of the Gospels that were written. And I love this. I don't know if you heard, but in 1994, there were fragments of the original script, where they wrote of the book of Matthew. And because of the technology, they were able to analyze, and they found out to be the same time as Yeshua, Jesus, was born, walked the earth. And so I love that. So anyway, so it looks like it was Matthew, then Mark, and now Luke has decided to write. And then John will be later. And because Luke was so methodical, I'm sure he interviewed people that had been with Yeshua. And think about it. He may have even interviewed Mary, Yeshua's mother. Don't you love thinking about that? And in verse 3, it said that Luke carefully investigated everything from the very beginning. So reading the book of Luke, you can tell he did a lot of research for it. And he shows that he wanted to write it very thorough, and from the very first part until the resurrection of the Lord. And it shows that he was methodical, shittati, during the whole time. And he wrote it from before, he started it from before Yeshua was born. And what's interesting also is that he wrote it to the most excellent Theophilus. And because Luke used this title, Most Excellent, Theophilus was probably a high up Roman government official, because they were the only ones that were allowed to use that title of Most Excellent. And I thought it was interesting because some historians say that Luke may have been Theophilus' personal doctor. That may have been how they knew each other. And so we don't know if he was a Christian, a believer, but we do know, because of what Luke wrote, that Theophilus would have at least been taught about Yeshua, right? And this I thought was really interesting. When I was researching it, there were many historians that believed that both the book of Luke and the book of Acts may have been like a defense brief for Paul's trial before Caesar. Because, Paul had to go before Caesar, and because of that, if it wasn't, it really would have helped, because it was from the beginning to end. And they're mostly talking about Acts, but it kind of gives a brief of Yeshua. But then it also, starting in Acts, talks about the believers. And it's just a methodical way to do it, from beginning to end. So that was kind of interesting to think that maybe that Paul's lawyer, whoever that would have been, would have used it. But let's continue in Luke chapter 1, verse 5. And it says, when Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah, and he was a member of the priestly order of Abijah. And his wife Elizabeth was also from the priestly line of Aaron. And thanks to Luke's specific mention of King Herod, we know the approximate time of these things happening. Herod was king from 37 BC until 4 BC, and then his son took over from there. So next, Luke talks about Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. So now we know that Zechariah was a priest from the lineage of Abijah, and Elizabeth was also from the priestly line, but from Aaron, Moses' brother. And we can read specifically priestly lineage, like Aaron and Abijah, from 1 Chronicles 23 and 24. And so, of course, because of the time, I'm not going to be able to read it, but it's interesting. So sometime this week, if you have time, just sit and kind of read about it. I love how God has all these things in His Word for us in the Bible. So Luke continues telling us a couple more things in Luke 1, verse 6 and 7. And he says, Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. I like that. They weren't just old, they were very old. Maybe they were as old as me, ha ha. So, But what a description that Luke used to describe this couple. They were righteous and they were obedient to the Lord's commands. Don't you love that? Don't you desire for people to say that about you? I know I would love it if people said that about me. And I started thinking, I think one reason that Luke said it was because during this time, where they talked about what they were like, this couple was like, the righteousness, the obedience. During this time, what was happening is if someone wasn't able to have a child, it was considered a curse from God. In fact, it was such a curse that the husband was allowed to divorce his wife if he wanted to. And I'm sure a lot did. But Zacharias didn't. They grew old and they were still together, and I'm sure still in love. So I think Luke's letting people know, hey, she didn't become pregnant because it was a curse from God. It was a reason that God was allowing it. And I think that's important as we read that to realize that. So let's turn to verse 8 and 9. It said, one day Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. And during Yeshua's time, there was about 20,000 priests that were in the lineage to be able to work in the temple. So what they would do, they would take turns, they'd take shifts, kind of. But each and every day, 3 priests would be chosen by lot. And that lot would tell them what they were to do. So every day there would be 3 of the priests that were working that day. And each day when they cast a lot, their focus was on the Lord, asking him, show us who you want, Lord, to do these 3 jobs. And then they would do the lot. The first one that picked the lot, or the lot would pick that first person, he would clean the altar and get the fire ready, right? The second person that was picked through the lot would kill the morning sacrifice and then take the blood and sprinkle the altar, sprinkle the golden candlestick and the altar of incense. And then the third person the lot would choose, that was considered the highest privilege. And we read where God set up the duty of the burning of the incense, which was the third person that was chosen each day. And if you turn to Exodus chapter 30, verse 7 through 8, it says, God set this up a long time ago. It said, every morning when Aaron, or in Hebrew, Aaron, maintains the lamps, he must burn fragrant incense on the altar. And each evening when he lights the lamps, he must again burn incense in the Lord's presence. This must be done from generation to generation. And so you can imagine what Zacharias was thinking when he was chosen to burn the incense. And I'm sure he was nervous and excited at the same time, right? And you wonder if he had talked to some of the other priests that had done that job and he found out, what exactly he was supposed to do. He would ask them, did the Lord show you anything? And so he was prepared on the day he was chosen. And so in Luke 1, verse 10, it continues, and it says, while the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. Now think about that. That happened every day, right? Because people sin every day and their sins were having to be forgiven. So as the 3 priests would, get everything ready, people would come to the temple and get their hearts ready, right? And so what would happen is when the first two priests would come out, first the one that got everything ready and got the fire started, and he would come out. Then the second one who had killed the sacrifice, and so it was a blemish-free lamb, and so he took the blood and he put it on those different things. Then when he came out, the people would know that the third priest that was in there was about to offer the incense, which also included praying for the Lord to forgive the people. So as soon as the two priests came out, the people would bow down, kneel before the Lord, and in their heart, they would start praying. They try to get prepared. So picture that, just in your heart and mind, think about that. And so here's the third priest, in this case, Zacharias, and what he would do, he's in there by himself, and the people are out there praying, and he would take some of the coals from the altar where the lamb's blood had been sprinkled on, and he put it in this golden bowl. And then he would put the incense on the top of that, and then he would swing it a little before the altar. And so here's a picture of it, just to get an idea of what it would have been like. And then it says the sweet smelling incense would go up to God, and it symbolizes how God receives the prayers of his people. So in other words, yours and my prayer, it goes up to the Lord as a sweet smelling sacrifice. Think about that. And throughout the Bible, both in the Tanakh, Old Testament, and the Ha-Brit Hadashah, New Testament, they talk about the connection between burning of incense and prayer. For example, in the future, what we will see in Revelation 5:8, it says, "And when he took the scroll, the 4 living beings and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb," which is Yeshua. Each one had a harp, and they held a gold bowl filled with incense, which are the prayers of God's people. Isn't that incredible? And then I love what the psalmist wrote in Psalm 141, verse 2. He said, "And this should be yours in my prayer. Accept my prayer as incense offered to you, and my upraised hands as an evening offering." Isn't that amazing? The Lord loves our prayers. It's sweet incense to him. And I love how in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, it says, "Never stop praying." And that's a good encouragement to us to remember, right? God deserves our prayer. He desires our praise. He deserves our praise and our thanks. And he desires for us to pour out our heart before him. And I love that. It's sweet incense to him. Just like when a child tells you, "Oh, thank you, I love this," and "Oh, could you help me with this? I need this." Or a child comes crying and saying, "I hurt," And doesn't that just, as a mom, as just a woman, whether you're a mom or not, you still have that compassion for that child. And that's how God is with us. He's our Heavenly Father. So let's continue in Luke 1, verse 11. And so picture that, just like that picture that we posted showed, Zacharias, softly swinging the bowl and praying. And then it says, while Zachariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zachariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zachariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you're to name him John. Now picture what just happened. Put yourself there with Zechariah. Here he's taking the gold bowl. Inside the bowl had the coals that had, the blood on it that had been sprinkled with the lamb's blood. And then on top of that was the incense. And he's gently waving it as he's praying. And so we know as a priest, Zechariah would be praying for the people and the nation of Israel. And he'd be praying that God would forgive them, that he'd have mercy on them. But we aren't told what else Zechariah was praying. But whatever it was, God heard it. And the fact that a couple of different things, Zechariah said, the scriptures say that Zechariah and Elizabeth were very old, which means I'm sure they were way past childbearing time, right? She couldn't just naturally get pregnant. And so I wonder, since Gabriel and God heard Zechariah's prayer and their answer was, your wife's going to have a son, was Zechariah praying about the fact they were childless? That maybe he was praying, hey, Lord, we're old now. Who's going to take care of us when we can no longer take care of each other? I doubt that it entered his mind that she would have a baby and become pregnant, but maybe instead, what are we going to do? And I love the fact that God knew his heart, knew his and Elizabeth's desire to have a baby. And even though they were old, even though maybe medically it seemed impossible, nothing's impossible with God, right? So God allowed Elizabeth to become pregnant. And he sent Gabriel to tell the good news to Zechariah. And in several places in the Bible, we read about Gabriel the angel, and he gives people messages from God. And the very first time in the Bible that we've heard about him is in the Tanakh, Old Testament, in Daniel chapter 8. And remember, Daniel was having a vision from God about the end times. And it was disturbing, it was scary and uncomfortable for Daniel. And so the Lord told Gabriel to go and explain the meaning of the vision to Daniel. And if you turn to Daniel chapter 8, and we'll just read 17 and 18, it says, as Gabriel approached the place where I was standing, Daniel speaking, I became so terrified that I fell with my face to the ground. Son of man, he said, you must understand the events you have seen in your vision related to the time of the end. And while he was speaking, Daniel still talking, Gabriel was speaking, I fainted and lay there with my face on the ground. But Gabriel roused me with a touch and helped me to my feet. Isn't that incredible? So that was in the Tanakh. Now we read that God sends Gabriel to give good news to Zacharias. And turn back to Luke 1, and in verse 14, we see what else Gabriel the angel tells him. He says, you will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. He's talking about the baby they'll have. For he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or any other alcoholic drink, and he'll be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. In other words, when he was in Elizabeth's womb. Verse 16, and he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God, and he will be a man with the spirit and the power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. Think about everything that Gabriel told Zacharias, how would you be feeling? What was Zacharias thinking and feeling? I mean, it was a miracle in itself that he and his wife were going to have a baby. And now Gabriel's telling him all this. And here Zacharias had been in the temple, totally focused on God, pouring out his heart to God. Then this angel appears and tells him, hey, God heard your prayer. And then he tells Zacharias, God's going to answer your prayer. Your wife's going to become pregnant. That in itself would be mind-boggling, right? But then Gabriel starts mentioning specific things about the baby. And don't forget, sweet women, all the Jewish people at this time were waiting for the Messiah to come. And here Gabriel the angel said that this baby that God's giving them will be the forerunner of the Messiah. That their child was going to turn many people to the Lord. And the angel also told Zacharias that this baby would be, in essence, taking the Nazirite vow. And remember, that means they've got to, for the whole life, stay away from alcohol and from any grape products. They need that mind without it being fuzzy from any drinking. And the Nazirite vow required a person to completely keep away from all that, but it was a sign that they were dedicated to the Lord. If anybody at that time, if somebody said, I'm a Nazirite, or I took a Nazirite vow, remember Paul did for a while, then they would know, oh, they're focused completely on the Lord. They desire to live a holy life. And it symbolized like living in purity and completely sold out to the Lord. Oh, and that's what I want people to see in me. And I'm sure you do also. And so Gabriel the angel told Zacharias that this is what God wanted for their baby. And then after Gabriel told Zacharias this, turn to verse 18 to see what Zacharias said. So Gabriel tells him all this. And Zacharias said to the angel, how can I be sure this will really happen? I'm an old man now. My wife is also well along in years. So see, you can hear that doubt, right? And then verse 19, the angel said, I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was He who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, of all, right? Of all, right now, I'm sorry. Since you don't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. For my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. Oh, how did Zacharias feel when Gabriel said that to him? And from a human point, from my point, I can't blame Zacharias for his response, right? But at the same time, here God sends this angel. He says something that, I would hope that I would believe. But Zacharias didn't. And so Gabriel knew what his prayer had been. He said, hey, God heard you. God's going to answer. But he didn't believe him. Now, remember why all this was going on inside the temple. There were all the people on the outside of the sanctuary that were praying. And remember, when they had seen the two other priests come out, they knew Zacharias was going to be praying for them. So that's also when they started praying, right? But at this point, I would imagine it was far longer than what normally that priest would be in there alone with, right? And so in verse 21, it says, While this is going on, it says, meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary. They were wondering why he was taking so long. Lama, why? Why are you taking so long? Apho, Zechariah. Where are you, Zechariah? Right? And so in verse 22, it continues, when he, Zacharias, finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. And so then they, the people, realized from Zacharias' gestures and his silence that he must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. And so in verse 23, when Zacharias' week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterwards, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. How kind the Lord is, she exclaimed. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children. Isn't that such an amazing story? And one of the things that I realize again is God's perfect timing when he answers our prayers. Zacharias and Elizabeth had been praying for years, I'm sure. But God knew the timing of when she should have a child. He knew the timing of when John would be the forerunner a few months before Yeshua would be born. Right? That they would be born close together. So before Yeshua started his ministry, John was paving the way, just like Gabriel told him, right? And so it made me realize when you and I have been praying and praying for something, and it doesn't seem like God's even listening, we've got to trust that there's a reason. That God always hears our prayers. He always answers our prayers. But the difference, he sees the full picture. He knows what's best for us. He is a loving Father. He wants to answer, but he wants to answer in the way that will benefit us the best, that will grow us closer to him, he can use us in other people's lives. So sometimes with our prayer, the answer is no. Sometimes it's yes right away. And other times, like in Zechariah and Elizabeth's time, it's, I'm going to answer, but in my timing, which is perfect. So sweet women, keep that in mind. As you're pouring your heart out to God, remember that it's a sweet incense to the Lord. He loves our prayers. And so pray, but then rest in the Lord, knowing he loves you, knowing he will show you his perfect will in your life. So next week, we will talk about how Gabriel, will talk about him again, only this time he's going to come to Mary. And then we'll read about both John and Yeshua being born. So spend time with the Lord this week. Praise him for everything he's done for you. Pour out your heart before him. And I hope you can join us on Yom Shishi on Friday at the same time as today. Pastor Stephen is in the book of Philippians, and I'm learning so much. I love that book. So let's keep each other in prayer this week. I hope you can stay around and chat. I love finding out how your week went. This time how Christmas and Hanukkah and the New Year's went. So I really encourage you to chat with us. And anyway, have a great week. God bless you.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. And that is who you are. And that is who you are. That is who you are. And that is who you are. And that is who you are. And that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are.